network with SSH, and that's going to be the management plane. That's going to be our interface into that different device. And then we're going to have the control plane where everything is configured, and then also the data plane where the data moves across that device. That's our traditional design. And we call this distributed because the management, control, and data plane is distributed to each individual device. Now let's talk about SDN, and let's bring software-defined networking into play. And you're going to notice that this diagram just got a lot more complex. And so what we have with SDN at the top, we have the application layer that we see up here. And within the application layer, there are SDN applications. And then down below that, we have the control layer, which is going to be our centralized SDN controller for the entire network. And then down below that, we have the traditional infrastructure layer. Now, what we do with SDN is we're going to break up the management, control, and data plane. So the control plane is going to go up to the centralized SDN controller, and the management plane is now going to go up to the SDN applications. And then the data plane is going to stay where it is down at the infrastructure layer. So rather than having the management, control, and data plane distributed to each individual device, now we have it broken up where the management plane is up within the application layer and the control plane is centralized at the control layer. Now, with that said, let's talk about what SDN applications are. So this top layer consists of applications that communicate requirements and network policies to a centralized software-defined networking controller. So examples of different applications on our network sending requirements down to a centralized SDN controller would be things such as traffic monitoring, load balancing, and security requirements. And so what's going to happen is that we're going to have programs at the top that are going to send information down to the centralized SDN controller via something called a northbound interface. So each of them are going to have a northbound interface, and that's nothing more than an application program interface from each application down to the centralized SDN controller. And in regards to the centralized SDN controller, think of this as the brains that are managing the overall network, and they're managing all the devices and the infrastructure. The SDN controller is going to receive input and information from the applications to make intelligent decisions to send information down to the devices at the infrastructure layer. So the SDN controller is going to maintain a global view of the entire network topology and all the different devices that are connected to the network at the infrastructure layer. And based upon the information that it receives from the SDN applications, it's going to make intelligent decisions about how to configure the data flow and the configurations and the resources for the devices at the infrastructure layer. Now, I know this is very conceptual, and that's the whole point. We're not getting into the details because I just want you to have a 10,000-foot view perspective of how this works. For those of you that decide to go down the path of becoming a network engineer, then you're going to have a much better understanding of how this works if you're implementing it within Azure or AWS or within a data center with Cisco devices or something else. It's all going to vary based upon the vendor, but overall, this is going to give you a high-level perspective. Okay, now moving on. So now we have our southbound interfaces, which are going to be our southbound APIs to our devices at the infrastructure layer that connect the centralized SDN controller to the individual devices down at the infrastructure layer. So these are going to be, like I said, at the infrastructure layer, our routers, our switches, our firewalls, all of our actual devices. The SDN controller is then going to communicate with them, different configuration settings and rule sets and so forth. And so hopefully what you've seen with this design is that we've taken a basic distributed design, if we go back where we have just this, to a much more complex and centralized way of managing our network by breaking up the management, control, and the data plane at the application layer and the control layer and the infrastructure layer. So that's going to go ahead and conclude our conceptual view, taking a look at the software-defined networking architecture with a conceptual diagram. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.